In this series of videos, we're trying to build this loan payment calculator where you can enter a loan amount, an interest rate, and a loan term in years, and press the calculate button and arrive at what the monthly loan payment would be. This is one in a series of videos. In the very first video, we walk through how to set up the background, the scaffold, which includes the background, the app bar, the app bar text, and the icon. In the second video, we touched on stateful widgets because that's something we need to enter into the program to be able to change and calculate values. And in this video, we're going to go ahead and fill in everything we need, except that we're going to use a simplified formula for now. And once we've got all this working, we'll come back and we'll put the correct formula in the fourth and final video. And with that, let's dive in. This is the original code that we used to make the scaffold, the background color, the app bar text, and the icon. And then in the last video, we went ahead and had this function that we called calculator body. And calculator body was used in the last video to introduce the concept of stateful widgets, because what we're calculating is going to change. Since it changes, it needs to be a stateful video. And the code for that is right here. And we can take a look at that code we used in the last widget, which is commented out. It shows that we've established a stateful widget, and then we've gone ahead and presented a button that says, press me, and when you press it, a result pops up that says, hello, Flutter. So with that, we've commented that out. Let's look at the current code. The code that we need for this project is here in calculator body. And the first thing we do is we extend the calculator body to a stateful widget. This little section needs to happen so that we can actually go ahead and put variables into the code. The next section has much of the code. It captures 3 data inputs and then calculates the answer. And there are 3 elements to this. First of all, we need to capture data. And to capture data, we need to use a text editing controller in Flutter. The first line, the text editing controller, is tied into this variable number controller 1. And then we repeat that for the next 2, number controller 2 and 3. Looking at this, we can see what the text controller does. We can put our cursor over each of these and see exactly what it does. Now that we've got the 3 of those, we need to have a result. Let's take a look at the calculate result. To calculate a result, the first thing we do is we parse the result in number controller 1 into a variable num1. The tryparse does help to eliminate bad data to some degree. And this is a simplistic introduction, so we're not going to dive too deeply into it. So it's going to check for a double, and if it's good, it passes that result on to num1. So number controller 1 ends up becoming num1 in a numerical format. And then we do the same for num2 and num3. If you place your cursor over Tryparse, you'll see what exactly it does, and you can scroll down on the descriptions to see how it works. And so now we've got the calculator part established. Well, let's look at the calculation of the inputs. Now, the correct formula is pretty complex, and we'll cover that in the last session. But to test this program, we'll use a simplistic formula. And that simplistic formula is that assuming that the sum of number 1, number 2, and number 3 is greater than 0, then result will store the result of num1, num2, and num3. And if there's an error, there'll be an error handling routine just underneath it, which we're not activating right now. Next, we have a question whether the button is pressed, and we're setting that to true when it begins to run. As it runs, the status will change when the button's pressed. Putting your cursor over the IsButtonPressed shows you how that works. Then we want to take a look at the HandleInputChanged. So whenever somebody clicks on the button, the status needs to be changed to false. So the color changes. And then if any of the numbers are changed, the status is set back to true by another part in the code, which we will see shortly. If button is pressed, set the state to false. And now let's get to the code. So first we establish some padding and positioning so that we can get items away from the edge insets. And then we establish columns to store the data. And those columns have a cross-axis alignment. And underneath that, once we set the layout, we establish the children. So we have the first input box, and the description for that box is enter loan amount. And then the text field is established. And then we go ahead and put in a sized box. So the box is a fixed size. Then we go ahead and do the second input box where we have a message, enter interest rate, or in the third box, enter loan term, and then we have a box. When the data is entered, it calls calculate result. And calculate result then goes through the process of capturing those values, running the formula, and so we have the result stored in result. And then we've established the elevated button. This is a button that when it's pressed, it calls calculate result. So if we expand box 1 to see what else is there, we provided the text that should be displayed above the box. Then underneath it, we have the text field controller 1. So the controller 1 data is going to be captured here, and it's going to be a keyboard type input. And then we have some decoration, and then inside the box, we say enter the loan amount here in whole dollars, and then we give it a border. And then right after that, we say when that data is changed, we call HandleInputChanged. So what happens is HandleInputChanged says that if the calculate button is not active, make it active. And we apply the same logic to the second input box. We see that we have a number controller 2, and that it's a keyboard input, and that the message inside will say enter interest rate here in here using the 8.25 for 8.25%. Then we have the on change called the handle input change. There it is. On change, handle input change. And so that's repeated for box 3. Let's take a look at it. Number controller 3 is the keyboard input, and it goes through enter loan term in years, and then handle input change is called. And then we have the button. Now let's look at the button. We define the button, we give it a style, we give it a color, and we also give it 2 colors, color gray and color green, which is driven by is the button pressed. So if the button's pressed, it stays gray, and if it hasn't been pressed or could be pressed, it stays green. And then we define the style, we put the word calculate in there, and then the text style is the button pressed? The text would be black if it's pressed and white if it's not pressed. And then we come down to the text result being displayed. With that, let's run it. Here it is. The screen's popped up. It's got all the data highlighted. And let's close the inspector widget. And then let's look at the code and compare it to what we're looking at. Here it says enter the loan amount. And we can see in the first line, it says enter the loan amount. Enter the loan amount here in whole dollars. It appears there. The header is enter interest rate. That's at the top. And then interest rate here in 8.25, etc. It's right there. The third box, loan term in years, and the text message below is the same. So you may not see that it's actually 2 different text strings here. And then it calls a handle input, and the elevated button is there, and the text is white, green with white text. And then the word calculate appears in there, and that's white when it's active and black when it's inactive. So let's enter some data. 1,101. Our formula right now just adds the 3 numbers. So let's calculate, and the result is 1,101. So that seems correct. So the code seems to be working. It's just that the formula is not the loan payment calculation formula. So looking at the whole code, we've got the first section that sets up the scaffold, the background, the app bar, the payment calculated text, the background color, and the icon. And from there, we call the calculator body. The calculator body is first extended to a stateful widget, and then it uses the TextEditingController to capture data entered. Then we have a filtering process to transfer it to a variable, and in the process, make sure the data is validated to some degree. And then we set up some functions. There is a state, and then we have the formula. The formula that we're using here is a basic formula, adding num1, 2, and 3, adding the three numbers together. If we change this to a negative number, you'll see there's no change. It doesn't work. And that's because it's an if condition. The result needs to be positive for it to work. So if we go ahead and say 9, now it's a positive number. There we have the new answer. Then the is button pressed. That's what determines whether that button is gray with black text or is it green with white text. And then the handle the input changes whenever we change a number. So like that 1001, if we make it 1002, the calculate button becomes active because it handles the state. And then we create the boxes, the headers in the boxes, the messages inside the boxes, and then the calculate button and elevated button. And then once calculation is complete, it displays the result at the bottom. It says the monthly loan payment is, and result is a variable we stored the answer in, so it displays the result in there. And then there's some text styling and font weight and font bold, which you can play with to see how this changes. So this is how the process is established. Now, what we're going to do in the next video, given how complex the calculation is, the formula to make this happen, we'll take this code and we'll go ahead and replace it with a code that calculates the monthly loan payment. And that brings us to the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching.